Hi, everyone. It's Diana, and I'm sitting here with our managing partner, Sandra Ziskin, and the head of our medical malpractice department, Mr. Jeremy Syrtash. Today, we're having a discussion about medical malpractice, types of cases, and what we can do to help you.
In these types of cases, sometimes you need more than one expert.
Yeah.
So, if we bring, for example, birth injury case, we have to prove that obstetrician, obstetricians are highly specialized doctors. Yeah. So we have to prove that they breached the standard of care. They made a mistake, but not only they made a mistake, that mistake caused or contributed to that child's brain injury.
Right. So that's the next thing we're going to is causation, right? Because
liability.
Yeah, right. So like if the child would have been born with a brain injury regardless, then the act of the doctor doesn't cause or contribute. It's immaterial to the baby.
And one thing on that point, many cases that it's really unfortunate that come my way is that we investigate a case, we breach the standard, a mistake was made, definitely caused the brain injury, but unfortunately the child's diagnosed with a genetic condition.
Right.
That's a case where the defense says, well, there's something called a break in causation, meaning, but you can't argue that but for the mistake of the doctor, the child would have been healthy. This child would have had a genetic condition that would have given that child disabilities, and obviously genetics are nobody's fault. It just happens at the time of birth, around before birth. Those are things that we also look into when we're investigating, and it's sometimes hard for families when they say, hey, the doctor did something wrong and they caused the injuries. What do you mean I can't get compensation?
Right.
But that's, we as lawyers have to work within the confines of what the law allows us to do for patients.
Right. And you had two, sorry, just because you had two children. So there's stages along the way that they would tell you, hey, something's not right here. Something's not. And then even if you as a mother were like, no, I'm going to proceed with this pregnancy. I'm going to take care of my child. And some people make that choice. And some people are, I guess, like, I don't know, because I've never had kids, so I have no idea, but how far along until they're like, yep, baby's totally healthy, he's going to come out fine, and then something.
So that's a more difficult case. So those cases, and actually that did happen to me with my first son, where they called me in for further genetic testing because something kept coming up on the tests that he was abnormal. Yeah. And they wanted me to do, and I ended up going for an amnio and to confirm. So those cases, though, where they tell you the baby's completely healthy, whether it's a doula, whether it's a midwife, whether it's an OBGYN, whether it's a nurse, whoever you're using during this time, they're telling you the baby's completely healthy. And then you give birth and there was a genetic defect that could have been detected and was misdiagnosed or missed. That's the negligence of the practitioner.
Yeah, and I've litigated many of those cases. They're called wrongful birth cases.
It's a horrible name.
It's a horrible term, but the essence of it is that a woman and a mother, is her choice to proceed with their pregnancy is taken away from her when the doctor fails to inform her. Right. And because of that, there's negligence and damages, because now the parents, the family has to raise a child with significant special needs. And that is a case that I've litigated for. Cases involving Down syndrome or cases involving spina bifida, which is a serious spinal cord condition.
Both of which are easily detectable with proper testing.
Exactly. That's why mothers go for ultrasounds to detect, and that's the whole point.
We have all the technology, I would think.
Exactly. And but again, there are some things with pregnancies and radiology that are negligence and are not negligence, and that's why me as the lawyer, I run these types of cases by radiology experts, and they tell us if there's negligence.
So complicated. So there's liability, causation.
There's liability, causation, and damages. So it's a really complicated thing because it's so not cut and dry all the time. There's so many facets to it. So that's why I'm happy we're talking about this, because the people that we do turn away, please understand we're turning you away not because we don't believe you have a case or we don't believe even that the doctor or the practitioner did wrong. It's simply you cannot fill all these criteria. I was in a trial with a doctor where the person had horrible brain injury, and they ended up dying. And it was interesting, and it went to a full jury. Now, the judge found that the doctor was negligent. The damages were significant in the millions of dollars. However, they would have died in any event, so there was no causation. So we ended up unsuccessful because he would have died in any event. So there's so many moving parts, and
even though the doctor did something wrong,
correct.
It's it's one of the most difficult things I have explaining to clients.
Yes.
When there's been a breach of the standard of care, the doctor is found to have made a mistake. And, without thinking about law or anything, it's if someone makes a mistake, they have to pay. But the law doesn't treat it like that. The law looks at the second component called causation. And I've had cases, for example, sepsis. Someone has a bacterial infection, they go into hospital, antibiotics are not given, and then the person ends up passing away. In those types of cases, the defense will say, okay, we didn't give antibiotics. Fine, we breached the standard of care. But even if we gave antibiotics, we gave the best treatment and we gave the best antibiotics, the person still would have died anyways.
Right.
And that's what I was saying earlier, is that not every bad outcome is preventable.
Right.
So
like that guy recently was in the news a few months ago. The man was in the waiting room for like 7 hours, and then he had a heart attack. So
correct.
He was going to have a heart attack anyway.
Well, I'm not a defense lawyer, but defense lawyers do argue that he would have passed away in any event. But I've litigated those cases, failure to diagnose a heart attack, and there's appropriate treatment that has to be given in a timely manner. But
so that's a perfect example. Actually, that case is a great example if we talk about it as a hypothetical, because we obviously don't have the facts. But Jeremy's quite right. The standard of care when somebody's complaining about heart is to immediately bring them in and put the ECG on them. Yeah. So if they did not do that, and we don't know, if they did not do that, and let's assume for a second that they did not do that, they just kept him in the waiting room. That technically could be negligent, because that's not the standard of care at an emergency room for a heart attack patient.
So if somebody comes in, I have chest pain, right away their job is to we have to prevent a heart attack from happening. Let's see where they're at with this EKG.
Yeah, because ECG, because there's certain protocols in an emergency room. So, we always see people going into the emergency rooms with colds, and they're like, well, I've been waiting 12 hours. Well, you're waiting there 12 hours because there's a protocol for
panic
people.
Attack.
Yeah, for people who are more, correct, people who are more
serious
injured. More seriously injured. So heart and heart attack symptoms is definitely up there on the list where they have to bring it in right away. I always laugh. I tell the story about my son had an allergic reaction when he was a baby, and I walked into the emergency room.
I feel bad for those.
I walked into the emergency room, and they told me to stand in line. Now, of course, because I'm me, I started screaming and I said, you stand in line. And what is he going to just die here then? And then, of course, the nurse said, no, for allergic reactions, because throat can obviously close up and they can die, we need to take them in right away. So had I gone to stand in line and God forbid something happened to him, that could have been another breach. So it's only what is reasonable under the circumstances for the symptoms you're presenting, how you're coming in, what you're telling people, and then we go down the list. But it is, listen, we have Jeremy's been very successful in cases, and he's been not successful in cases. But because this is so complicated, I cannot stress to people enough, you need to call us. It's always good to call, because the worst we're going to tell you is no. If we tell you no, don't be offended because of all these complications. However, something you think is nothing, or you think it's not from a certain situation. One of the things I always think about is cerebral palsy. CP cases are very often from medical negligence.
Doesn't that happen later in life too? CP?
Well, it's not all the times, but many times it's due to cerebral palsy is a brain condition caused by inadequate oxygenation and blood flow to the brain, either before birth or before birth or during birth. And many times it is caused by negligence. So for example, we have a mother who's in labor, and that there's a fetal heart rate, which they're measuring how much oxygen the baby's getting, and it's dropping and dropping and dropping, and they don't deliver the baby in time enough. In those types of cases, I've argued that the delay in delivering that child caused the cerebral palsy. And if we can make that causal connection, if you will, which is the doctor should have delivered the baby and that caused the brain injury, then damages flow from that.
And the doctor can't just make the decision themselves. So this happened to my girlfriend. They were like, oh, the baby's heart rate's raising. We have to go into C-section now. She's like, okay, that's a major surgery that she had to have.
Absolutely.
And it was a call that they made that she just had to agree to. So it sounds very, complicated.
She doesn't have to agree.
She didn't have to.
But however, they would have told her,
baby.
Correct. They would have told her, if we don't go in right now, your baby could end up with cerebral palsy or die.
Yeah.
And going back to what you said, actually, is that in every one of these cases, you have to analyze whether it's an error of judgment or negligence. And this is actually this is actually very important in the sense of, doctors make mistakes and the law recognizes they're humans. The question is it a mistake that another doctor would have done the same circumstances? So in judgment call situations such as it wasn't unreasonable for the doctor to have done something or not done something, that's not gonna rise to the occasion of negligence. But in a situation where it's below the standard of care, meaning the standard in obstetrics is to deliver a baby right away when the fetal heart rate's going down, and it went on for 3 to 4 hours, that's below standard, then that's a case where we think we could be successful. But these cases are very complicated. And, I've been doing this for over a decade and I'm not a doctor, but I've got a pretty good look at these cases and I can determine if I think they have merit. And I think if they have merit, we'll typically sign up the client and then do an investigation to give some answers to the family.
Do you find the defense is always, well, it was going to happen anyway?
The defense is always going to say it happened anyway. The defense's job is always to defend the doctors. And to be clear, in Canada, they do defend the doctors very rigorously. So it's not an easy thing.
I would think.
Also, I think, Jeremy, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're seeing a lot more of the doula midwife problems because people are wholly reliant on doulas and midwives, and then
on a natural kind of childbirth situation, or
I've heard this argument a million times, and it blows my mind because, and I have nothing against doula and midwives in a hospital.
Yeah,
right. That's my feeling.
My sister did that.
Yeah. I have no issue with them being in the hospital with a person and trying to do it, but things go wrong. And I love the argument. They always say, well, hundreds of years ago they never had doctors. They had doula midwives, and I'm like, yes. And the infancy mortality rate
and not just infancy, the maternal, the mothers would also pass away.
The mothers would pass away in birth. So let's not do that. So I have no issue with them like having a doula and a midwife, but certainly when people are doing these home births and that sort of thing and things go wrong, and if the doula and midwife don't alert them to the issues and get them to the hospital in a timely manner, it can have devastating
They have insurance so that you can go after in that case?
They do.
If that's the case?
They do.
Okay.
And what I will say about midwives, for example, is that typically midwives oversee uncomplicated pregnancies. So pregnancies where it's low risk, there's no health complications. But many cases that I've seen that I've been involved in is, for example, the mother has something called gestational diabetes, which means that there's a higher risk of blood glucose levels with the mother. And that makes the mother higher risk, and not just high risk for the mother, but high risk for the baby. And, midwives that go according to the standard of care and practice appropriately, they'll either refer to an obstetrician, which is the right thing to do, or they'll monitor it until a certain point where they pass it off to a doctor. But I've seen cases where midwives, they don't pay attention to it, they don't diagnose it, they don't treat it, and unfortunately that can cause the child to grow larger and get a brain injury around the time of birth. Now, again, there's no one size fit model in these types of cases, but it's really the cases I see are the midwives failing to recognize their abilities and knowing their limits of their practice, leading to negligence. That the cases that I see.
Wow, yikes! It sounds like there's a lot of stuff surrounding birth injuries, but we do help with other areas.
Yes,
like
there's
cancer.
So yeah, I don't. Delayed cancer is a big thing. I see it all the time. Unfortunately, now especially, I don't know. It just feels like it's all around right now. Unfortunately, I just saw a case with a doctor who had the blood work a year. A year was the blood work said cancer for a year, and nobody told the person. And in that year, it got really way more far gone than it needed to be. Yes, and because also a lot of cancers, especially for women, cancers before menopause are way more aggressive than after menopause. So you have a premenopausal woman who gets a breast cancer or a uterine cancer, it can progress really, really, really quickly.
Yeah. Also, depending on the type of cancer. I had a case a number of years ago where a young mother of 3 children, and she was a primary breadwinner for the family, and she went in with a lump, and the radiologist detected it and wrote to the family doctor, lump, most likely cancer, and it sat in the in-tray, in the fax, in the family doctor's office for 1.5 years.
The amount of trust, though, that person had in their
course.
doctor.
And what was the...
In that 1.5 years, the cancer went from curable to incurable. And unfortunately, she passed away. So I represented her family in a wrongful... It's called a wrongful death case.
Right.
And we try to prove... We proved that the death could have been prevented had treatment, but for the negligence, but for the facts not being ignored for a year and a half, treatment would have occurred promptly, and then the cancer would have been most likely treatable.
And this is not a situation where somebody could say, well, you're going to get cancer anyways, because it's like, no, I came to you because I was having issues. You found it. You didn't tell me about it. So it's different.
But what I find in those cancer cases are that the defense doesn't always fight standard of care. They'll say, okay, the doctor should have obviously conveyed the results to the patient, but they'll say, well, the cancer was so aggressive, the mother would have died anyways. And that's a tactic I see the defense always using. And
treatments, right?
Of course. And that's why, if you we have these concerns, you bring it to us, we analyze it. So in a case like that, I would get an oncology expert to look at the type of cancer. There's different types of cancer. There are cancers that are more aggressive to treat, more responsive to treatment, less responsive to treatment, and all depending on the facts of the client's case. This is all something we can analyze for you.
100%. And even your genetic makeup of how you respond to chemo, everything. It's so specialized cancer now. They have it really down to like what your genetic makeup is, what type of cancer you have, if it comes from the family, if it doesn't, if it's environmental. And like Jeremy said, it could be a delay of a year and a half. It could be a delay of 6 months. Any delays period is bad. And I'm not talking about a delay of a day or two. I'm talking about, if you've got like a month or two, even a delay, cancers can spread that rapidly. Yeah. They really can. We've heard cases where people go for tests and then a year later, it's sprung up out of nowhere. Yeah. And this is why these sort of cases are becoming more and more common. And I feel like in this OHIP system where things get lost, a lot of times doctors are trying to cram in as many patients as they can because they're not getting paid great. Let's face it, they're not getting paid great.
You think it's the OHIP?
They're overworked.
They're overworked. Listen, doctors in Ontario, as much as we're talking about suing and whatever, they are overworked and they are underpaid.
Of course. And I think it's important you point that out, because in negligence law, it's a civil system, meaning we're not putting doctors in jail. We're not trying to take away their licenses. Yeah. Doctors,
unless they were taking out women's ovaries left, right, and center.
Well, that guy got his license.
There are exceptions, but what I will say is that typically, in almost all the cases that I've been involved with, even when there's a settlement or even a jury verdict, jury or court verdict, the doctors feel bad. They're human. The doctors and nurses and medical professionals, they don't go into the healthcare system to harm patients. Right. But what's important is that there is medical malpractice is a civil system to get compensation for when those mistakes occur.
And that's why you have insurance. Insurance is for mistakes, to be clear. Just like when you get in a car, you have insurance on your car for when you get into a car accident, it's a mistake. Nobody, except for maybe this one guy who deliberately like to take out ovaries, he's sort of the exception to the rule, unless you're a sociopath. You don't really.
And there are unfortunately those in every profession.
Correct. But unlike that, you do make the mistakes, and you're right. That's why we have insurance to pay for it, so that people can. The idea is you'll never get your kid maybe healthy. You'll never get your loved one back that died. But we're trying to get you as much as we can to a place you were before this happened.
Right. And money's not going to undo the harm that happened. It's not going to reverse a brain injury, bring back a loved one, a mother,
but it will help with a funeral expense or therapy or treatments or anything.
Or you were dependent on this guy for his salary. He's the breadwinner of the house. The family needs money to survive, to pay the mortgage.
Yeah.
And he's got young children, and then suddenly these children don't have the income, or the surviving spouse doesn't have the income to care for the children anymore. Right. This is where we try to help the family. We don't get money for the sake of getting money. We don't just say, let's just get money because of harm happened.
If that was the case, we'd take on every case.
Of course. It has to, the damages have to make sense. And look, I really want to help everybody, but the system doesn't allow for us to do that.
You're limited. There's like a little noose around your neck, just being like, just a little bit, you can get away with it or not, right?
Well, it's whether or not you have a case. It's the best we can do for you under the circumstances. And like Jeremy said, nobody comes to us happy they're coming to us. No. It's never a windfall. This is always under the most tragic of circumstances. And all we can do is try and help you get whatever we can to make your life bearable.
And just on that point, anyone who contacts us, whether it's for a motor vehicle accident or for personal injury or for medical malpractice, the first thing I always say to them is, I know the last person you want to be talking to right now is a medical malpractice lawyer. You just lost a loved one. Your child just got injured at birth. But we're here to take care of the legal aspect, so you could focus on caring for your child, grieving for your family, being there for your children, and that's why we're here.
Right. we might not be able to help every single caller that calls us about a medical malpractice. Listen, we know, as we discussed, doctors are humans. They also make mistakes. And again, sorry, I should say any health practitioner, they can make mistakes. Just call us. I mean, you're going to speak to a professional or somebody who's been doing this for a long time, who knows the whole rigmarole and the system, if you will. We're happy to speak to everybody and see what, if anything, we can do to help you.